Hey everyone, it's Jake of Jake's Metal Chat. Hope you're all well, and welcome to episode 54 of my Metal Vault, where I will be exploring and showing you my favourite albums within heavy metal to thrash metal to death metal, black metal, doom metal, sludge metal, folk metal, you name it, all of that excellent stuff. Got an album here that hopefully a lot of you know. If not, then here's a new band and album as well. These guys formed in New York City in Yonkers in New York City, and have been going for the best part of 35 years now. And this is another band I still yet to see live. And if I have to travel to go see them, I'll travel and go see them. That's just it. But I know a lot of you who will be watching this would have seen this band live already. So without further ado, this is Mortician. And their music's just heavy, nasty, death grind, brutal death, grindcore, whichever way you say it. To me, it's death grind because it has that mixture of death metal and grindcore and put it all together. Well, you got something as awesome as this, and I got here their very first album, the very first one, and like I said, if you don't have this album yet, then go pick it up and have a listen to it on whatever you listen to, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you listen to your music, and just give it a good listen. If you love your death metal and your grindcore, well, in this case, if you love your death grind, here's the album for you. And once again, this is Mortician. This is their 1996 debut, Hacked Up for Barbecue. And I gave this a listen early this afternoon, and you know, it still holds up today. Because I remember when I first heard this album, I was like, wow, awesome stuff. Because, well, actually, it's one of the songs I hear that's how I got into him. So here we got the guys. We got Roger and Will, the two that comprise the band to this day. Yeah, my copy has a crack right there. I'm trying to remember where I bought this originally. I can't remember where I got it. It might have been at a festival. I'm pretty sure it was at a festival. Of course, released by Relapse Records because they are still, well, they're not on that label anymore. They have Mortician Records. That's the label they're on now. And of course, as it's a CD, I like to get the booklet out. It's got the artwork right there, which is very Texas Chainsaw Massacre inspired. Got the guys again, so Will on bass and vocals and Roger on guitar, and he did the drum programming because a lot of the albums do have drum machine, except for the demos, which I'll get to in a minute. So open this up, you got the lyrics. And if you know Mortician, you know that they use a lot of samples from horror films, and obviously this is, of course, the case with this album and albums going forward. It's the CD. Yeah, Chandelier, pretty much Texas Chainsaw Massacre inspired, and there is a sample from that film on one of the songs. So let's talk about Mortician. They formed in Yonkers, New York in 1989. Before they changed it to Mortician, they were called Casket. And only changed the name to Mortician because that's one of their own songs. And if you're very familiar with Mortician, you know that John McEntee from Incantation was in Mortician. He's mainly on the demos. And the drummer was a man by the name of Matt Silcher, who unfortunately passed away in 1994. But like I've said before about a lot of musicians that have passed away, the legacy lives on, and it definitely lives on the demos. And cracking drummer, definitely. So their first release was a rehearsal from the 14th of December of 1989, which has 3 tracks on it. So Mortician, Necro Cannibal, and Brutally Mutilated. And obviously, Necro Cannibal was the first song I heard, which would be on their debut. And then we get to demo number 1 from February of 1990. Not sure when it was actually released in 1990. And I do actually have that tape in my cassette collection over there. And I also have the other releases as well, but all there, and the other ones are in there. And didn't think to bring them onto this video, but there you go. And then they released their single, which has the same songs from the last 2 demos. So Brutally Mutilated, which was released on Cepheric Decay Records. So they're on that record label to begin with. And of course, the lineup on that single, and of course the demos, obviously John McEntee on guitars and Matt Silcher on the drums. Getting mentioning John, obviously was in both bands at the time, so playing guitar in Incantation, but now doing vocals for Incantation, as you know. And as for Mortician, obviously he was on the Brutally Mutilated single and the Mortal Massacre compilation as well. And Matt Silcher was only on the demos before, drowning in July of 1994. But again, his legacy lives on. And I believe John was on... Oh, John was a guest musician on the demos, on the first demo. I don't think he played guitar back then. That was someone named Matt, who was only in the band for that year. Then we get on to the single Mortal Massacre, which has the Tall Man from Phantasm, and there is, of course, samples from there, which, of course, this was the first release they released on Relapse Records. And this is what like I've said, you notice with Mortician, there's a lot of horror samples, because Will and Roger are big horror fans. Will definitely is a big horror fan. And then we get into the compilation from 1993. Of course, I own this, the Mortal Massacre compilation, which has... a lot of them are live tracks after the initial songs. So you got Mortal Massacre, Drilling for Brains, Red Rum, Mortician, Brutally Mutilated, and Necro Cannibal. And of course, on this release here, they got a cover of Napalm Death's Scum. Really cool cover as well. And the first EP from 1995, 3rd of July 1995, so that's coming up very soon, is House by the Cemetery, which has 5 songs overall. And then, of course, 1996 rolls around. It came out in October of 1996, and then we're going back to this one, Hacked Up for Barbecue. And just a intense album. And of course, Roger would join the band. I think he joined the band back in 1991. So pretty much after John left the band, he continued guitars on. Now this album here, as you can see here, has 24 tracks, so quite a lot, and I might mispronounce some of them. So do bear with me. But before I get onto them, so I'm gonna go back and forth through the traditional notes, and of course, let's go through who did what. So Wes did the cover art, and Matthew and William were the executive producers on it. Dave and Bill did the mastering. Mike did the remastering in 2004, so this got re-released in 2004. I'm very sure mine is an original. I don't think this is a re-release. Have to look at the number, but yeah. Desmond did engineering and producing, and Roger assist engineering on the album. So really cool there. So let's get on to the first track, which is actually the longest one on this album. So track number 1, which is Blood Craving, which uses a sample at the beginning. And if you are very familiar with horror films and just films in general, mainly horror films, track 1 uses a sample from the original When a Stranger Calls, which, picturing the scene from that, I was like, yeah, that's haunting. And then it just goes right into the song. Next one, Embalmed Alive, which is only 50 seconds long. There's quite a few short ones on here, and carrying on that. Pretty much every song's just carrying on, and it's all just heavy, nasty sounding guitars and bass. And then, of course, you know the drums are programmed, but you know what? It gives it its charm. Will's bass is distorted to absolute hell. His vocals are low and guttural, and Roger's guitar is just very chunky throughout the entire album. And then we go into Cremated, which I'm pretty sure uses a sample. Nope, that's track number 4. Like I said, all carrying on from each other, so it's just unrelenting brutality. Then Free on a Meat Hook, which is using a sample from the film Free on a Meat Hook. And I'd never heard of that film. When I looked it up, it's from 1972, I believe. And then we go into Brutally Mutilated, so re-recorded for this album here. And then Deranged Insanity, which I believe, no, wait, that's track number 7. It uses a sample from a film, which then goes into Cannibal Feast, which uses a sample from Cannibal Ferox. And then carrying on the brutality, we're Blown to Pieces. And then right after that into Fog of Death, which uses a sample from The Fog, one of my favorite John Carpenter films ever. And then we got Brutal Disfigurement, which I don't think uses a sample. That's why I'm going to keep going back. No. But track 11 does. Apocalyptic Devastation, which is not a horror film. It's more of a post-apocalyptic film. Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior, uses a sample from that. And I believe, yeah, track number 12 is Inquisition, which I don't think uses a... Nope. Doesn't use one, so I'm going to keep going back and forth here. The title track, Hacked Up for Barbecue, uses a sample from Texas Chainsaw Massacre, hence the very Texas Chainsaw Massacre-esque cover right there. And then we got Ablation, I'm going to say Ablation, which I don't think uses a sample either. And that's track number 14. Track number 15, that's Necro Cannibal, which is how I found out about it and just got instantly hooked to that song, and it's become one of my favorites ever since. Then we got Ripped in Half, which is just slow, chuggy riffs from the bass and the guitar. Of course, the drums. And then we got Morbid Butchery, which I think, yeah, uses a sample from the film Maniac. And then we got Decapitated, which is track number 18, and then we got Drilling for Brains right after that, and Eaten by Maggots uses a sample from film which I still need to watch called Mortuary. Track number 21, which is Witch's Coven, uses a sample from Suspiria, one of Dario Argento's best films ever. He's got a lot of grades, but for me, that's one of his absolute best. And of course, Frozen Soul did a cover of that for one of their demos. Then we get on to the last few tracks. So we got Worms, which doesn't use a sample from anything, nor does track number 23, Annihilation. But track number 24 uses a sample from the first Phantasm film and the third Phantasm film. So Phantasm and Phantasm 3, Lord of the Dead. If you've not watched any of the Phantasm films, do so. But and that's what ends the album. And these two did an excellent job on this album. Well done to them. Of course, those I pick tracks apart, but all of it's just unrelenting brutality. And for good reason. It's very, very much just a absolute barrage of guitar, bass, drums. Will's vocals are just very super low. When you hear the demos, they're not as low as you would hear from this album and onwards. And also another one of my favorite logos within extreme metal, of course. Like I said, these guys are Death Grind. I'm trying to think what's on this artwork. So there's so many different things happening. But like I said, it's very Texas Chainsaw Massacre inspired. And yeah, and I know there's going to be people out there that would know Mortician, but like, oh, I don't like it because he uses too many horror samples. But then there's another band just like these guys who did the same thing in Impetigo. So out those bands, I think they were literally the first two bands to use samples from horror films, sci-fi films, everything. And you can tell there's a lot of love, not just for metal, but for horror films, of course, from that man right there. And I'm very sure Roger's a horror fan as well. Well, you can see there by his t-shirt, he's got a Darth Vader t-shirt, so very much a Star Wars fan, sci-fi fan, of course. So you get two fans of horror films in a band, and you get something like this. And very, a very underrated album because obviously, again, a lot of albums were coming out in that year of 1996. Can't name any more at the top of my head, but of course, I will have a look through the list of albums from 1996. That's just one of many. And so let's figure out what other ones, same as I'm exploring this album and obviously exploring the year that it came out. So 1996, you had Roots by Sepultura, The Jester Race by In Flames, Morning Rise by Opeth, Wise Blood by Corrosion of Conformity, None So Vile by Cryptopsy, Swan Song by Carcass, October Rust by Typo Negative, of course, which I've covered here on the channel. Crimson by Edge of Sanity, Dope Sick by I Hate God, Best of the Beast, I think that's a compilation by Iron Maiden, Load by Metallica. Of course, covered the three best albums here on the channel. Great Southern Tranquil by Pantera, Elegy by Amorphis, The Time of the Oath by Halloween. Was it The Secrets of the Black Arts by Dark Funeral? Antichrist by Golgoroth, Storm Blast by Demu Borgir, and yeah, so many. Wait, pagan terrorism tactics by Acid Bath, and one of my favorite albums to come out from the year of 1996, Far Away from the Sun by Sacramentum, which I have also covered here on the channel. So quite a lot of albums came out that year of 1996, half of which I own on either CD or vinyl. And I just realized I've been holding it like this, not like this, but either way. If you love like really intense, heavily distorted bass, chunky guitars, drum machine driven death grind with very, very low guttural vocals, then this is definitely for you. If you're not into that sort of stuff, then and you don't like various samples from films, this won't be for you. But of course, if you're watching this video and you love death metal, thrash metal, black metal, doom metal, sludge metal, folk metal, stuff like that, and you know, everything else in between that's also very extreme, you're in the right place. So my overall conclusions of this album right here. Of course, I'm going to be saying a lot of the same things, but yeah, it's what in this case it's very heavy because of how heavily distorted the bass is, the guitars, and not the guitars are not distorted, but they're very quite high in the mix, and obviously with Will's bass, very much. I think everything on his amp was just turned up all the way up, and that's why it sounded so poppy, crackly, pop, a very crackly, poppy, cracky. Say that again. Crackly, poppy bass, basically, like it's cracking and popping like you would hear on a vinyl record when you put it on. Of course, a lot of people are not gonna like drum machine driven bands, but you know, I mean, I like bands that have a drummer, I like bands that don't, and I love Mortician, and I think I saw an interview before I get to my overall conclusion that Will he did a review, not an interview, saying I think the next record, whenever it does come out, will have a live drum on it, so that'll be cool. Yeah, yeah, very heavy. It's brutal. It's intense. You can tell that there's a lot of love of horror on this album, and the other albums as well, which I'll name a few. So, Chainsaw Disfigurement, no, Chainsaw Dismemberment, Domain of Death, Final Bloodbath Session, Darkest Day of Death, and Reanimated Dead Flesh. And that was their last album in 2004, so they haven't released anything in 20 years, but who knows? Something might happen. They might have a new album coming out. Who knows? Yeah, very pretty much horror inspired extreme death grind right here, and a timeless masterpiece overall. And of course, doing this list, I was like, there's got to be another album I haven't talked about yet. And Mortician came back onto my radar again, and I was like, yeah, this one. Let's talk about Mortician. And of course, one of my other favorite releases is Zombie Apocalypse, which a mate of mine kept saying it was a album. It's not an album, it's an EP. But other people would say no, it's an album, but no, it's actually an EP. So yeah, overall conclusion, timeless masterpiece, and an album which I think if you love the more extreme side of metal, this is definitely one that you should pick up and have in your collection. But if you do have it on vinyl or CD or cassette, give it another playthrough, give it another spin, and it might bring back some memories of when you first heard it the first time around. And just a cracking album overall. And hopefully anyone watching this there'll be new fans of this band. So once again, people, Mortician and Hacked Up for Barbecue. Very heavy, very brutal, very underrated. Definitely get that in your collection. And that's been another episode of my Metal Vault. I will have more stuff like this because obviously I've got 4 more to talk about on this side, and then the other one, of course, is a classic from the late 80s. So like this album here, I'm very much on that intense, fast, brutal side of metal. But on that side of it, we're going to basically the start of gore grind. And you can probably guess who I'm talking about there. But with these guys mixing grindcore and death metal together, you just get an absolute barrage of intense, brutal, chuggy guitar, very distorted bass, and a drum machine that's just there non-stop, and very low guttural vocals. And of course, they got the albums out, but do check out their demos as well and their EPs. Like, check out their earlier stuff with Matt on drums. Really cool stuff. So, but there's going to be a lot of you veterans out there that's probably a fan of everything that Mortician's ever released. And I'll be covering these guys again at some point because I'll probably just go through like the bands that I have the most stuff from. So Mortician is basically that band. I still haven't got the other 5 albums, but I will eventually, and I'll show them on the channel. And again, that is it for this episode of my Metal Vault. Of course, got so much more albums to show you going forward, and obviously not just death metal. Obviously, there's going to be a lot more thrash, a lot more black metal, much more doom and sludge and folk and everything else in between, like either subgenres from those genres or of course, more albums from the early 2000s and so on and so forth. So thank you very much for tuning in. Don't forget to like this video, share it around, comment down below if you got anything to say about this album, about Mortician in general, like your favorite releases. And most importantly, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to keep up to date with everything that I have coming up here, not just on this series, but in other videos that I got. And keep an eye out for when I have more guests. I'll put them in the community page so you know who I've got coming up on what day, week, and time. And yep. But be sure to look out for more stuff like Mortician, Dismember, Iron Maiden, and Exodus. So that mix of like your thrash metal, your death metal, your black metal, your heavy metal. Just keep an eye out on this series if you enjoy this series the most. And that's it from me. I've been Jake of Jake's Metal Chat. Keep that banner of metal well and truly high, and I'll see you all again in another episode of my Metal Vault.